Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Butterfly Princess Show. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Beattie, who is an author and a playwright. Andrew has wrote many history books on the subject of Prince Arthur, The Princes in the Tower, Henry VIII, and he's also written a number of children's plays that have been performed in youth theatres in schools. He's also written a number of travel books on the Danube and in Switzerland and books on the environment. And he's also written a number of children's books which have been published by the children's publisher Sweet Cherry Publishing. We're going to be talking about all of them today, so it's going to be a really enjoyable chat. So hi Andrew, thank you for joining.
Thanks for that introduction. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Well, I like to do my research, so I looked on your website and found all that information out. So basically about then, why travel and history books in particular?
So, well, the travel and history is, they're pretty linked, I guess. Whenever you travel, you learn about the history of places, and I've always been interested in history. So, I guess I've travelled because of that interest. So, those two things I think are definitely linked. In fact, that's why. So, yeah, I think most people are interested. Most people who like traveling also like history as well, I guess.
And what made you want to focus on a particular area? So you've written books on like the Danube and Switzerland. They're just a few titles of your travel books.
Yeah, it's very difficult to say why some areas interest me rather than others, and I think that might be the case for others as well. I've always been fascinated by particularly Central Europe and Alpine Europe and Eastern Europe, that sort of area from, I suppose, Switzerland eastwards into what used to be communist Europe. And in fact, I visited that area when it was communist for the first time. I visited East Germany and Czechoslovakia when they were communist countries, and they were fascinating countries to see. And it's fascinating to see the political system there at the time. This was the late 1980s, and how that translated into what you could see in those countries as a visitor. And I've been interested in politics as well as history, and of course those countries, particularly Eastern Europe, carry the weight of history about them from the Second World War. But I've been interested in the Middle East as well. I wrote or co-wrote one of the rough guides on Syria, and I've written about Cairo as well. And I think the Middle East is also a really interesting region where the difficult politics there is often something that's very apparent when you travel around that region. So these places almost have narratives attached to them, if that makes sense. You had with the case of East Germany, for example, the division of Germany after the war, and then its reunification in 1990, and to see that narrative at work in what you can see. I think is fascinating. I visited Berlin for the first time back in 1984, and remember being in West Berlin, and you could climb up to these lookout towers and just look over the two parts of the Berlin Wall to East Berlin, and that was an extraordinary thing to see. And I've been to Berlin a number of times since then, and of course you can still see remnants of the wall and that sort of thing there. So I think there is a narrative to those places like Eastern Europe and like the Middle East as well, which have a lot of kind of quite recent politics behind them, if that makes sense.
And you also studied geography at Oxford University. Has that aided you a lot in your travel writing?
Well, I think definitely, yeah. I mean, that links into my interest in places and people and the politics and history behind them. And you can actually, a lot of geography is about how time and the past has influenced places, So a lot of geography fits into that, and it's definitely informed both my travels in those sorts of places, and I did a fair amount of political geography when I was an undergraduate. But in completely different places like the Swiss Alps and so on, the physical geography and understanding what or how landforms come about and so on is really important as well. So yes, geography has definitely influenced my writing of those books that I've done.
And like you showed at the beginning of the video, is that you've wrote a lot of history books on like in the footsteps of Prince Arthur and the princes in the Tower and
That's
Henry
right.
VIII. Obviously, they're very, very well known historical figures, and we know a lot about Henry VIII from his six wives, his great from Rome, his famous marriages, and the
Mm-hmm.
dissolution of the monasteries. King Arthur is quite a historic character with Camelot, and then you've got like the Princes in the Tower, which is a
Mm-hmm.
mystery from like the sons of Elizabeth Woodville and Edward the Fourth, and
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of a mystery of like what happened to them, who was responsible for their death. Was it Henry the Seventh or Richard the Third? So how was it writing books about those historical figures?
Well, it's really interesting you latch onto those three historical figures because, of course, Henry VIII definitely existed, and we know a huge amount about him, and we know mostly where he was at each stage of his life, if you see what I mean. But that's completely different to King Arthur, and many people doubt whether he existed at all. And all our stories about him are just stories left by poets, often written down many centuries after he existed. He might actually have been two people, in fact. And there's a kind of King Arthur from the north and a King Arthur from the West Country who have somehow blended together to create a legend. So you've got Henry VIII, who was definitely a ruler, King Arthur, who was probably a figure from myth, though some people doubt that. And then, as you said, that my other book about historical characters is about the princes in the Tower, who were indeed the sons, as you said, of Elizabeth Woodville and Edward IV. And they were imprisoned in the Tower of London when Richard III came to the throne, but no one knows what happened to them. So they're a kind of different category again. We know they existed, but we've no idea what their fate is. And there are about 5 or 6 different, very different fates that they could have come to. So I am intrigued by, I guess, by historical mysteries like that, and I'm intrigued as well by semi-mythical figures or mythical figures from history like King Arthur. I have to say, going back to the geography, that my 3 books, and they're all for a publisher called Pen and Sword, but my 3 books about those personalities are all about, if you like, the geography of their lives. So the places that were associated with them, if you see what I mean. So in Henry VIII's case, it was his palaces along the Thames, but also he had many other palaces, and he was associated with northern France as well. For King Arthur, it was a lot of sites in the west of England where Camelot conceivably might have been, and other events of his life. And with the Princes in the Tower, it was a fair bit about the Tower of London, and also Shropshire and Herefordshire, where the boys had been born or grew up. So with all 3 cases, it was looking at the lives of historical personalities through the places associated with them, and also maybe encouraging people to go out and see those places, because some of the places associated with all 3 don't exist anymore, but many do. You can go to, obviously, the Tower of London or to Hampton Court or wherever it is, to see a place where part of Henry's life or part of the lives of the princes are unfolded. So there's a blend there, I think, of both history and geography, if that makes sense.
And of course, you've written a number of historical children's plays for being performed at youth theatres in schools. What is it like adapting a historical event or a time in history that you have to adapt it in order for children to enjoy it and understand it?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I've written basically an adaptation of the most famous life of King Arthur as a children's play, which is called Arthur Boy, King of Britain. And obviously, if you're writing something for children to perform or watch, because these tend to be put on by schools, so it's school children who are performing it and school children who are watching it. I suppose you have to get to the most action-based parts of lives. So children like battles and intrigue and that sort of thing. And with the King Arthur play, of course, you've got the sword in the stone episode, which you can stress very highly. So I suppose it's not too much kind of dry politics behind things, but get to the nub of the matter in terms of battles and intrigue and rivalry in particular. And Arthur had rivalries with his brother, and then later had rivalries, of course, with the Saxons. So rivalries as well, which probably chime very well with children, I think, are important in that case.
And so you've been able now to write a children's series of books called Tales of Medieval England, which is published by Sweet Cherry Publishing. So was it easy? What was the process like being able to write books, write plays for children, but then having to write books for children?
Yeah, that's interesting. So this is my book for Sweet Cherry, which is called The Secret in the Tower, and it's for children aged 10 to 12. This was published a couple of years ago, and so it's a fiction book. But I suppose one of the things that interested children's publishers when I approached them was that I had written plays previously, and that kind of I suppose showed that I could tell a story in narrative form, I guess, in a way that was appealing to children. But obviously, writing a play is completely different to writing a novel. But I suppose there was a transition. Both of them are about telling stories, building characters, finding the most interesting parts of history that are instantly appealing to children, and then sort of utilizing them. And so there was a similarity. And as I said, publishers, when I approached them, including Sweet Cherry, who eventually published the book, were interested in the fact that I had written plays and had them performed, and that's why they took a close look at my work when I approached them.
Yeah, because with you, we're talking now about the first book in the Tales of Medieval England, which is obviously The Secret in the Tower. Obviously, yes, in the backdrop of the towards the end of the Wars of the Roses, the early years of the reign of Richard III, before the big battle with
Henry Tudor,
yeah. So, but you set it as like your main character of Jack that goes on a bit of an adventure.
Yeah, that's right. So I thought, a lot of historical fiction, particularly for adults, maybe less so for children, has historical characters at the centre, if that makes sense. So I'm thinking in particular of Hilary Mantel and her Cromwell novels. Well, virtually everyone in those Cromwell novels, including the main character Cromwell, but the people around him, were actually people that existed, if you see what I mean. With The Secret in the Tower, I did something different. So my main characters are all completely fictional. And the adventure plays out through them. So the main character in it is a boy named Jack who lives very near to the Tower of London, and his aunt, also fictional, runs an apothecary, which is a sort of medieval version of a chemist shop, if you like. There are historical characters, and Richard III himself does appear right at the start of the novel, clopping away on his horse through central London. There are historical characters, but they're more they're the more minor characters. So I thought it would be more engaging for children and easier to write as well, and more enjoyable to write, because if I concentrated on made up characters and fictional characters rather than real life characters in telling the story. Do you see what I mean? So you can let your imagination run much freer if the characters are are fictional.
And obviously you mentioned that in your children's books, the historical figures sort of like take a back seat, and you may be fictional characters more at the centre of it, but you've still got that historical backdrop, really.
Definitely. And with The Secret in the Tower, the backdrop is the disappearance of the two princes who we were talking about earlier. But even then, of course, we don't know what happened to the princes. So I arrived at my own conclusion for that particular novel, and put Jack into that situation, if that makes sense. And if you want to see what conclusion I reached about the fate of the princes, you'll have to read the book and find out. But yes, it means that, as I said, real life historical characters are not exactly background, but they're the more minor characters. But of course, as bigger character, I like to think, is actually medieval London itself, which was a noisy, filthy, chaotic sort of place, and also with a kind of background of violence as well. It's set just before the Battle of Bosworth, where everything was very tense because the country was about to be invaded and that sort of thing. And of course, that's factually based as well, although you look at the facts and then you use your imagination to build up what hopefully is a compelling picture of London. And it's actually set in the month of August, when it's very, very hot, and it's a hot summer, but the weather kind of is symbolizes the tension that's rising as well, and so it's a blend, if you like, of historical facts and fiction. And I think in writing for children, you don't want too many facts anyway. You don't want any research to be too obvious on the page. Does that make sense? Children like a story. They like a story to be motoring ahead, and can't really get bogged down with historical detail. I think writing historical fiction for adults is possibly a bit different, and you can pause a while and set the scene and use some of your research a bit more. But certainly writing historical fiction for children, the characters and the narrative needs to be at the forefront of things, and hopefully they'll learn some history along the way. But it's that's the secondary thing, if that makes sense.
And how is it, because you've wrote another book within the Tales of Medieval England that's coming out later this year. It's called The Angel Player.
That's right.
This again is set in the backdrop of an historical event, the Black Death. So why did you decide to set this new book in the series against this Black Death?
Yeah, it does sound quite a dark subject for a children's novel, although children's books have been set during dark times in the past. I mean, you get a lot of children's novels set during the Second World War, for example, which is quite a dark period of time. I thought it was just a nice background. It would make a nice background to the story that I had of a boy who's in a company of traveling players, and he meets another boy on the road in odd circumstances, and this other boy then seems to be endowed with some sort of magical powers which are related to the time of the Black Death that's going on at the time. So the Black Death seemed to me to be quite a compelling, if very dark, kind of background to the book, but it was also an integral part of the story I wanted to tell of this mysterious boy that the main character encounters. So, I hope that works well as a background, and children will learn something a little bit about the Black Death through reading the book as well, though I hope it's mainly enjoyable as a work of fiction.
Yes, and the thing that I want picked up on is that I read this, and obviously we know that it doesn't come out yet, but people can pre-order the book. I think it comes out in September.
That's right. So it comes out in September the 26th, I think. But like all books, it's on Amazon. I mean, it's on Amazon already. So I think you can, and Waterstones and so on. So I think you can pre-order it. Yeah, yeah.
And you also mentioned that as well as the Black Death and the character and this mysterious character that the boy encounters, you also say in the synopsis that you can learn a bit about the history of plays and acting.
Yeah, and acting as well. Yes. So as I said, the main boy through which the action um, is seen is with a company of traveling players, and these players used to go back in the Middle Ages. They used to go from town to town, and they have a cart, and they all travel in the cart. There are only 4 of them. They all travel in the cart, and then they get to a place, and they turn their cart into a stage, and they tell Bible stories on the cart, and obviously people come round and listen to them. And as was traditional, the boy plays the female parts because women and girls didn't tend to act then. And so I thought that would be a nice, interesting setting. I guess it links into the fact that I've been involved in directing plays and that sort of stuff in the past, and a lot of children like being in plays as well and drama. So I hope it will be that side of things away from the Black Death, but I hope that setting in a company of traveling players will be compelling for children as well.
And the final sort of point that I wanted to discuss, I mean, I don't know if you could tell us anything yet, but how long do you anticipate the tales of the medieval England to be? And have you got any other historical subjects that you want to put
Yeah.
in the background of any future stories for the children?
I do, and the publishers are interesting as well as I work with them as what comes next. But I'd like to do something on the Vikings in particular.
Yeah.
I think they're a compelling. There's a compelling story behind them, and they're not often associated with medieval England, but the last Viking raids were taking place in medieval times in northeastern England in early medieval times. So they'll, I think, make quite a good background to a future story as well. So we'll see how things go with these 2 books.
And obviously, I would be happy to have you back on at some point, if I could read them 2 books and, I'd be happy to discuss it.
Well, I'll be absolutely happy to discuss that, and particularly when the second book's out, and so you can read both of them. And it's been very enjoyable talking to you today, and I'm sure it'll be enjoyable talking to you about the 2 books once you've read them. And obviously you can't do that now because we're recording this before The Angel Player has been published. But when you're able to read both of them, it would be great to come back and talk to you about both of them.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for interviewing me. It's been hugely enjoyable to talk about the various books that I've been working on over time. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.